Okay, wonderful. Thank you so much, Alija, for that. So next up is, as I said, the annotation team. David Rumsey already introduced Valeria Vitali this morning as a lecturer in digital humanities at University of Sheffield. I'm going to go ahead and introduce Rainer because they will be following each other on this team. So, I met actually both Valeria and Rainer when Valeria was director of the education and co-investigator for this Mellon-funded project Pelagios, which we heard a little bit about, and we saw that on the last previous screen. So Pelagios is this really long-running project to build a network and community around the application of linked data to historical place names, and that's where Rainer comes in as well. So Rainer Simon is an independent researcher and software engineer who specializes in the design of tools that help people explore, analyze, and manage data more easily. So he's maintainer of Annotation, which you've heard about already, and Recogito.js. Recogito, which of course grew out of this Pelagios network. I just wanted to mention very quickly before I hand this over to Valeria that you can feel the sort of flavor of the DH aspect of this section. So Valeria is most excited about this project because of its ability to, the way that it allows people to engage with annotations, making maps open, interactive, multi-layered cultural documents. And for Rainer, it's open source, right? The nature of this material being this software being open source, it's the open source. It enables other institutions to integrate these same processes and user interface. We are dedicated very much to opening this project up and, as I said, building community through this process. So we're going to save questions for all of these till the end. Valeria.
Thank you very much, Nicole. Okay, so now Rainer and myself, we're going to talk a little bit about the maybe more interactive side of the project, which is the one around annotations. And I will start discussing with you some of the ways in which users can engage with the machine-generated annotations that Ligi has just told us about. So as you may have seen in the demo of the search before, the way that users are likely to get to the original maps, to the maps, is through the search. So they have probably followed one of the links in the search through the masonry or the grid view. They've searched for a word, they're clicked on the map, and they have landed on the page of the map where the annotation of the word that they looked for is very nicely highlighted and singled out. And so far, the experience of the user with the annotations has been great because they have seen exclusively very good annotations that match 100% or almost 100% what they looked for. Once they are here in the map, they can choose to actually see all the annotations on the map by clicking on this icon here. And we very much invite them to do so. We want them to do so. But when they see all the annotations on the map, it is likely, or well, actually it is sure, that there will be some mistakes. There will be some gaps. There will be some things that are not perfect. And that is obviously not surprise. This is, automatically generated annotations. A map curator is very good, but of course, it was never going to be absolutely perfect. However, we didn't know, and actually we still don't know, how will the public, how will the users relate to this new kind of information, which is incredibly rich, but also imperfect. So we didn't know if the users were going to feel, kind of diffident towards this information, if they were going to feel maybe a little bit frustrated because they didn't have control over some information that, it was wrong and they couldn't change. So Rainer and myself, with Pelagios, we have quite a long experience in manual annotation used on historical digital documents, both textual and in image format. And we know, And we have seen with the collaboration with the National Library of Scotland, that Katie have also mentioned, how attractive that is to the users, and how through this almost physical act of annotating, interacting with the document, how this process generates engagement and how it almost promotes a sort of detail-oriented approach to the map. So we decided to introduce experimentally an annotation feature in the interface. It's quite minimal, but we hope elegant. And I'm not going to give a demo of how the annotation interface works. If you're interested, please stay with us this afternoon. I'm just going to mention very briefly the kind of things that you can do with this interface that enables users to interact, to edit the annotations. You can confirm them. If they are correct, they become verified. If you decide to edit them, to change them, you can either change the text or you can change the shape of the bounding polygon. And you can also delete them if they are false positives, or if you see in the case of Obind there, if a word has been mistakenly split into two. But maybe the most important thing that I wanted to point at now is that yellow side of the annotation pop-up that you see, which is a kind of warning and information that says that these are automatically generated annotations. There is a link to read more about it. There is a link to hide it in the future browsing of the interface. But we thought it was really, really important to be absolutely clear and transparent about both the provenance of the data, but also the quality of the data, so that we could manage expectations and avoid disappointment. And we also wanted to communicate the idea that the quality may vary a lot between maps. And that obviously more recent, very nicely printed maps with very clear labels are much easier for computer vision algorithms to decode than messier historical maps with unexpected abbreviations, even if they depict exactly the same, geographic space. So we didn't want to hide the imperfect quality of the data. On the contrary, we wanted to invite the users to join the effort, to feel involved, to feel that they could participate. And we think that through the annotation, we can pursue two quite important objectives at the same time. And one is improve the data. We want to create some sort of star data set where all the verified annotations will go. And we hope that this will become in the future important for evaluation, for training, for ground truth, for future versions of Map Curator or other algorithms. But also, we think that it's helping us to foster engagement with the community. And we feel like, after we have given the users the experience of distance reading of the maps, if we can borrow this term from the digital humanities for, the scan books, through the annotation, we give them back the experience of close reading, of engaging very, very closely, almost intimately with the map again. And we think that this is a kind of relationship with the map that a lot of people who love maps will enjoy. So we think that the annotation side of the project has a huge potential for future developments, and we are very much interested in what you think about that. Some of the ideas that we have right now are, we want to enable users to create annotations from scratch. You may have noticed that it's not possible at the moment. That's by design. We wanted to start with something simpler. And the other area that we are massively interested in is adding semantic information, involving the users in adding extra information about the labels. For example, adding tags, maybe choosing from a list of categories, or adding manually links to historical gazetteers or other knowledge bases that are relevant. And some semantic information, of course, will come into the map through the modules of Map Curator, and they will be using OpenStreetMap as a knowledge base, and that will already enable a lot of interesting aggregations. But we think that involving the users, we can take this a step further, and we can, for example, add semantic information also to things that are not likely to be in OpenStreetMap, like unnamed entities or historical entities that have disappeared. So besides, using this new tool, this new interface to add information from historical gazetteers to the map, providing semantic enrichment. And there was a question before about, how to combine words in different languages or different names for the same place entity. Well, we do that with gazetteers, we hope, in the future. And yes, David, I am a little bit obsessed with place names. But on top of that, what we think is that we could use this interface, we could use the combination of a high number of automatically generated annotations and the opportunity for the users to interact with them, to edit them, to correct them, to create historical gazetteers, to collaborate, for example, with projects like the World Historical Gazetteer. And if we can, push this even a little bit further, our vision is that users will not only correct the errors of the automatically generated annotations, but they will add further content. We will be able to capture things like forgotten place names, unofficial place names, nicknames that the buildings may be received from a particular community or in a particular period of time. And these are pieces of intangible cultural heritage that we will be able to collect and put back in the map. And you see here an image of a map of Libya, just because I can't wait to start using this new tool for the Heritage Gazetteer of Libya and engage with the communities that we collaborate with. And now I'm going to hand it over to Rainer, who made this possible.
Yeah, so in the spirit of involving a wider community, I also want to speak a little bit about the developer community, because as we have heard, so open source has been very important for us throughout the whole project. So we don't just want to make the data available to everybody, but also want to make the tools available to everybody. That means, on the one hand, simply a licensing question. So you are free legally to reuse these things, but it's also a matter of how to design those tools, how to design the documentation around it. And we are still working on that, of course, but I think in some sense, we've made first steps into making these things much more reusable also outside of our current, out of the machines reading maps projects as such. So one name that has been dropped several times here is Annotation. So Annotation, I want to explain a little bit what it is. It's a JavaScript library, so it's like something that's aimed for developers of software and developers of tools rather than users who want to build their own image annotation websites, I would say. So Annotation is the kind of component that also sits in the Luna viewer for displaying the annotations. It has a much longer history, so it has also grown out of this Pelagius initiative and then sort of taken a bit of a life of its own. And as you can see here, as an image annotation library. So it's not really, or not necessarily, meant to be a map annotation tool, but really, as I always say, like a glorified box drawing tool. So if you have an image, if you have zoomable images, Annotation gives you something that you can drop into a website, and you have tools to draw boxes, to draw polygons, and attach any kind of information like comments or tags. And it's very moldable, so you can configure it in different ways. You can give it different styles. You can change what's in this pop-up box that you can see at the bottom. So it's something that's very flexible, that you can use in different contexts, and that we have modified specifically for the machines reading maps projects as well. Another thing, which another term you might have come across is OpenSeaDragon. So OpenSeaDragon is another kind of software component that sits at the heart of many of the image viewers that we're using. So if you know Mirador or the Universal Viewer, both open source viewers for AAAF images, at the basis, they use OpenSeaDragon as their viewing layer, as their viewing layer. So that's the kind of base technology which allows you to give, which does the zooming, the panning, the rotation, the touch interaction, and so on. And Annotation is also available as a plugin to OpenSeaDragon. So effectively, we are sitting on top of OpenSeaDragon, and other tools that also sit on top of OpenSeaDragon, like Mirador, could use the same stack. So we would also hope that this would aid implementation in other institutions that may already use Mirador as a viewer, for example. A few sort of lines of code. I still want to show them, even though I'm aware that not everybody here is a developer, of course. It should just show you that it's really easy to use Annotation. So what you see here on top, very roughly, is you create an instance of OpenSeaDragon, which means you have a web page, you drop in the viewer, you say, okay, here's the image, you have some kind of smallish configuration code, and then you have a zoomable version of the image in your website. So that's essentially what we see also on the Luna viewer. And down at the bottom, you drop in Annotation, which says, okay, here's my viewer, Annotation, please attach to that viewer and load these annotations. So if you build big applications, it's a bit more complicated than that, I admit that, but the very basics is it's very simple, right? So you have these open source components for the viewer, for the annotation, and that's it to get the basics running. And that's exactly the kind of goal that we have, to make our open source components as usable as possible for the developer community. So you don't have to be like a power developer. If you have basic web development skills, that should be enough for you to use our software components. Yeah, so maybe just a few examples in terms of what I said about configurability or how you can adapt Annotation. In the afternoon, or we've already seen some screenshots that Valeria has shown. You see that those look very different from the picture that you see here. Although it's really just another incarnation of Annotation in use, just in a different context. So that's the original interface that we built for the team in Machines Reading Maps to work on our first test data set. And we also used that for the National Library of Scotland crowdsourcing pilot. It has more features. What you can see here, for example, is it has the ability to create groups of annotations and to create an order within the group. So if you say you have Sandport Street, it's two different annotations. You want to keep them as separate annotations because you want to keep the transcriptions to just a single word, but still you want to have them in one group. And you want to say, okay, Sandport is the first word, street is the second word. So that's a custom kind of customization of Annotation. And as I said, that's where it gets a little bit more complicated, but in principle, you can build everything on the same open source basis. Yeah, another thing, I was actually waiting to see this on this big screen. So Annotation dates back to 2019, I would say, and it has grown old a little bit in terms of the technology. One major limitation that we had for Machines Reading Maps was that Annotation would get really, really slow from about 1,000 labels onwards, I would say. That, of course, is not a good fit for the materials that we're dealing here with davidrumsey.com. I think the biggest map has like 150 or 180,000 labels on a single image. So we completely rewrote the view layer for Annotation. It's now WebGL based, which means it uses your graphics card hardware on your computer, and it deals with the kind of numbers of labels that we're seeing in the collection. No problem on the average computer. I mean, it sort of depends a little bit on what kind of machine you're using, but on the average computer, it now works really fluidly. And in terms of the pop-up, you will see the final version when I do a demo in the afternoon session, but also just to say that we've gone through multiple iterations of that. So we've tried to experiment a little bit with different types of user interface styles, also kind of different ideas in terms of the features. So Valeria has already hinted at this, that we would like to collect more information than just the place names, maybe personal stories that users might have. It didn't make it into this iteration of the software, but maybe this might come in the future. We don't know. there was a design iteration, and I'm already looking forward to showing you the final kind of version in the afternoon session. This is really just a summary. So as I said, it's a whole stack and lots of kind of different abbreviations, brand names and such. But in principle, we're heavily using the Luna viewer, of course, and just plugging in small components here and there to make the annotations work. OpenSeaDragon already has been a component in there. Annotorious has just been stuck on top, and I think it worked really well. It was also a great opportunity to build a better Annotorious. So the work that we've done in this project is essentially the basis of the next major release of Annotorious that will come out later this year, also integrating this kind of WebGL and graphics card accelerated view layer. Yeah. So that's basically everything I wanted to say about the technology. If you have any questions about what it takes to integrate it in your own kind of collection system, then definitely do get in touch. It's always hard to answer this in a generic way. It's always, takes the time to sit down, look at what the kind of collection technology is that you have already now and how to make it work with Annotorious. But yeah, I think it has become quite flexible, and we're interested in seeing it evolve into different ways and work as well as possible in as many different environments as possible. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Rainer. If you know Ricogito, you might also know that not only is it award-winning software, which I'm sure that Annotorious will also become, but there was a song written about Ricogito. Look for that. It's really fun.